Here's a little diagram then of theories of diachronic identity in order to give you a set of choices to think about as you engage in self-examination to think about what theory seems to you to be the most plausible. On one side we have psychological theories, the best known of which is the Locke-inspired theory concerning memory links. You might also wonder whether there could be a theory that has to do with continuity of personality, whether having a certain type of personality is going to be enough to enable you to be the same person over time. You might also wonder about that, whether that can be made plausible. For example, two people might have pretty much identical personalities, but without counting as the same person. But you might see whether it's possible to develop and refine a theory of psychological continuity in terms of personality. And another alternative is something like what we might call the sameness of soul theory, according to which it's not so much a matter of psychological states, even if you are bereft of psychological states, thoughts, ideas, emotions, etc., maybe you could still have the same soul that persists through time. And if one held that idea, that would be enough to justify you in saying it's the sameness of soul that gives you diachronic identity over time. Notice, though, that that's a bit of a black box in the sense that it's not clear what will count as saying of a certain individual that it has a soul or some other individual that it does not. And it's not clear what would count as how we could go about justifying claims about one soul as opposed to another. This is a little bit mysterious, perhaps a little bit unsatisfying. And then finally we've got the bodily continuity theory, which says, as we've just seen, being the same person over time is a matter of bodily continuity, which permits the possibility of changes in the body, but does not allow the changes to be so drastic of the sort that we find with the body duplicator machine. So as you think about what makes you the same person over time as was sitting in the chair where you're sitting now perhaps a week ago, or riding on a bus, driving in a car, going for a walk in the park, I take it you think there is a same self over time that constitutes you. What is the thing that makes it the case? If there is an answer to that question, which of these different, so to speak, menu options would you choose? Now notice also that non-Western traditions are not all going to be happy with the idea that we can really believe in the sameness of person over time. That is, not all traditions, philosophical traditions, assume that or accept that personal identity over time is something we should actually accept. On one strand of Buddhism, we find a denial of that idea. According to certain strands of Buddhism, for example, we can make a distinction between what you might call conventional on the one hand and ultimate truth on the other, where according to the theory of conventional truth, it's convenient. It's a kind of convenient fiction to talk about the sameness of a person over time. This is the person that wrote that check. This is the person that did that crime. This is the person that owns that car, etc. So those are conveniences that help us organize society. But at the level of what you might call ultimate truth, the idea of a same person over time is going to be something we need to give up on a Buddhist conception, certain types of Buddhist ways of thinking about the self. And this, according to this idea, there's just a swarm of matter here sitting in this chair. And in that swarm of matter, you find some sounds and you find some visual experiences, you find some ways of speaking, you find some ways of behaving, but there's not a self there any more than there's a self that is constituted by the upper part of your pencil and the back of the seat in which you might be sitting right now. There's not a self there. The question is whether it's useful to group things together. It might be useful and convenient to group together the things that constitute this rough swarm of flesh over here sitting in this chair, but that's not a self in anything like the traditional Western sense. And the idea is going to be that we should give up on the idea of a self, that the idea of talking about a self is, strictly speaking, going to be a fiction. What we have is just cells doing various things that are more or less grouped into swarms, and there's more fluidity and less distinction among so-called persons than you might have thought. And it can make sense to talk about I just as a convenience, but it doesn't make any literal sense to talk about I at the fundamental level. Some philosophers have thought that if we give up the idea of a self as persisting through time, as construed in the Western sense, we'll be more open to connection with others, less worried about egocentric concerns, less focused on what matters for me and my own integrity, my own interests, my own personality, and just thinking about all of us, the gigantic swarm that is humanity and perhaps other non-human animals, and think about how to perhaps make things better in the course of that. Not everybody feels that they can make perfect sense of this Buddhist alternative to Western ways of thinking about the self, but I also want to present that to you as an alternative, as an option, as you think about what conception of the self seems most reasonable to you.